Okay, we start. So, hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much to Sabiha for putting up such a fantastic event. It's a great opportunity for me to share some of my works and my colleagues' work about the origin of viticulture and grapevines. It's also a good opportunity for me to see old friends, to make new ones, and I hope that you will all go out of this symposium with more knowledge and more friends and more happiness thanks to wine. So I will speak about the grape domestication. Some of my slides will be similar to those of Dr. Ahmed Uri. We didn't talk about that before. It's not a problem to repeat, and maybe we can confront some of our ideas. I will speak about the domestication, why, where, and when. And I have added a small section here to fit with the symposium topic. It's followed by some recent DNA results about Anatolian grape varieties, including world premiere results. Beat the drum. So why, where, and when? Why? So we can ask the question, why this botanical species, as you have seen, that belongs to the Vitaceae family. It has many different genera like Parthenopsis, Ampelopsis, Vitis. Then you have around 60 species of Vitis, half of them in America, half of them in Asia. And one of them is Vitis vinifera, which means in Latin that it's holding the grapes. And when I say we, I'm a botanist. I was trained as a botanist. We make two sections. One is silvestris, is the wild grapevine, and one is vinifera, is the cultivated grapevine. And within the cultivated grapevine, a Russian researcher, Negrul, made in 1938 three subsections. One is occidentalis, everything we use to make good wine. So Merlot, Pinot. The other one is Pontica, like Furmint, Saperavi from Georgia, and the other one is Orientalis, mostly table grapes, Sultanina, Khalili, and stuff like that. So all the wines that we drink today come from domestication of the wild grapevine. Maybe one or several domestications events, we will talk about that later. And we have today between 5,000 and 10,000 grape varieties in the world. We are not even sure because many different names are given to the same thing, the same variety. So we don't know exactly the number. And most of it, I would say 99.9% of it, gives all the wines that we drink in the world. From this fantastic Tavernello from Italy to this table wine from Bordeaux. Aubryon, who cares? I say 99.9 because we have a very limited number of wines produced with Vitis that are not vinifera, especially in the US. They have Vitis labrusca, Vitis ballandieri. They make these wines that we call foxy, that they smell like the belly of a rabbit or something like that. So, well, it's a cultural thing, but it does exist. So we can ask the question, why do you bother domesticate the grapevine? It's not easy to reach the berries of a wild grapevine. Why would you break your neck trying to hold berries, trying to catch berries, while you can have fruits that are easier to reach in the forest? So it has a low food value. Of course, it brings sugar, as Dr. Uri said, but other fruits can bring sugar as well. Very difficult to reach. Here we have in Georgia a painting of people harvesting wild grapevines with the stairs. And here I showed a picture of fermentation to show you that yeast for fermentation do exist in the nature, do exist on the skin of the grapes. So why did we domesticate? This is called the Paleolithic hypothesis. And the reason is serendipitous inebriation. We can imagine a Paleolithic man, or maybe a woman, because they were hunter-gatherers. The men were hunting, the women were gathering fruits. So maybe a woman gathered enough bunches of grapes risking her neck, because maybe she observed the birds to do that. And it's very difficult to take the wild grapevines before the birds, because once it's ripe, they are on it. So you must be very quick. So maybe she gathered enough of them, maybe in a rock crevice, or maybe in a wooden basket or something like that. And with the weight of the bunches, some juice came out, some juice exuded. And since the yeast for fermentation exists on the skin, it started to ferment. And before it turned to vinegar, maybe she tried, and the tribe tasted this beverage, and they got inebriated. And with the euphoria, they had only one thought in their mind: let's start again. So we think it's the reason for the human beings to have domesticated the grapevine. So the main difference between the wild grapevine and the domesticated grapevine, there are some others, but the main ones are the sex in the flower. So these are wild grapevines, and they are dioecious. It means they have two different houses. It's a Greek name, two different houses for male and female. Some vines are 100% with male flowers. So male flowers have stamen and anthers, no pistil. So they only produce pollen. And female flowers and female plants have the female part, the pistil, and the stamens are not functional. Here you see pictures I took a long time ago of this in nature. While the cultivated varieties are all hermaphroditic, which means they have pollen and pistil in the same flower. And this is a necessity. Otherwise, you would need to pollinate them all the time, and you would not have the berries that form, and you would not have a harvest every year. So this is the reason why almost all the cultivated varieties are hermaphroditic. But look at the technology. Fantastic. We have in the nature 2% of cultivated that are dioecious, and these 2-3% are what I call the hermaphroditic hypothesis. Because if you're a Paleolithic woman or man, and you take a wild grapevine that is 100% male and you plant it in the front of your cave, you will never have berries. You would abandon. If you plant a female, 100% female, in the front of your cave, without any male vine around, it will never get pollinated, so never have berries. If by chance you choose one of these guys that are hermaphroditic, then you will have berries every year. Bingo, I want to keep that. So then you multiply it. That's my theory of the origin. And here, it's me in southeastern Turkey. It's close to Diyarbakir. Actually, it's in the Tigris River Valley. And I have found a hermaphroditic plant. So I'm trying to mimic the hermaphroditic symbol, but I'm not sure I'm doing right. And by the way, that was in 2004. We can see some differences somewhere, but anyway. So in this population that was always preserved from cultivation, we have found dozens and dozens of wild grapevines, and indeed 2% were hermaphroditic. And this is what our ancestors have chosen to domesticate and to make the wine we have today. After domestication, what do? You can propagate, you can multiply the vines by two different means. One involves sexuality, one not. So sexual reproduction, you plant the seeds, very easy. And every time you plant the seed, you go to another generation, and it works exactly like us. If a couple have children, the children are different from the parents, and their own children different, etc., etc. So you change the DNA, you change the identity every generation. But we observed since a long time ago, not only for grapevines, but for many plants, that if you want to keep the characteristics of an organism, of a plant, you need to not go through sexual reproduction, you need to go through vegetative reproduction. That means cuttings or layering. Gardeners know how to do that. It's working with tomato, for example. You cut a tomato branch. As long as you have buds, you plant in the ground, and you have not a new individual, a replicate of the individual. Layering, you take the shoot, you bury them in the ground, and it will grow roots again, and then you can cut from the source plant or not. So this is a technique that is very, very ancient, known, and this is how grape varieties have evolved. And today, we have this huge diversity. These are the wild grapes. Of course, over the centuries, humans have selected those with the largest berries, the highest rate of sugar, the lowest acidity, those that were fitted to their taste. So that's why we have today all this diversity in terms of table grapes, wine grapes, etc. So where did it happen? I'm making an advertisement, not for me, but for my friend Patrick McGovern. Dr. Uri talked about him recently. I've known him since almost 20 years. He is the best-known scientist in research on ancient wine, enoarchaeology, if you want to call that. You have all the information about everything before Christ is in there. After Christ, it's too recent for him, no interest. So we have primary and possibly secondary domestication centers. I will not speak about these today. I put question marks because it's still not really proven. Most of the time because papers saying that there was a domestication center in Italy was written by Italians, in Greece by Greeks, etc., etc. So there is a nationalism that we need to be careful with. So I will focus on the primary domestication centers that are in this big circle over there, to not be more precise for the moment. In any book you can find, you will read that Transcaucasia, between Great and Small Caucasus, is the center of origin for the grapevine. Botanists, archaeologists, historians, etc. And it's true, in this area they have maintained a very strong wine culture. But you will see that southeastern Anatolia is probably the best candidate for the first center of grape domestication, with findings in archaeology, genetics, and linguistics. We think that southeastern Turkey, between Tigris and Euphrates, is where it all happened. Why is it so? You might have heard of the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent, for the shape, is this area here, which was the birthplace of our agriculture. In this area, and especially here in Karachada, in southeastern Anatolia, we have found wild populations of the ancestors of many cereals, many agriculture crops that we have, including einkorn, wheat, pea, lentil, etc. And in this area, they had the knowledge of how to domesticate crops for agriculture. So they could have had the knowledge of domestication for the grapevine. This is a very nice slide, but it's a bit confusing. In blue is the land, and the sea is in brown. Sorry, I didn't know how to change that. It was made by Jared Diamond. Fantastic book, The First Farmers. The expansion of food production from domesticated plants, dated by C14, from the Fertile Crescent, 18 BC, so 10,000 years ago. And in fact, they went to archaeological sites. They took the plant remains and they tried to date with C14 how old they were, the cultivated plant remains. And in this area, which exactly represents the Fertile Crescent, they were 8,000 BC, so 10,000 years old. If you went further, it was 7,000, then 6,000, 5,000, etc., etc. So everything points to this place as the most ancient region where agriculture was born. And also this place was not only where the first plants were domesticated, but also the first animals. I love this slide from Zeder, Domestication, Early Agriculture in the Mediterranean Basin, Origin, Diffusion, and Impact, because it shows that except for goats, which were probably domesticated 9,000 BC in Iran, we have here in southeastern Anatolia, the Fertile Crescent region, the first domestication of pigs, of cows, of sheep, and so on. And here you have the expansion of these domesticated animals. And here you have the first evidence of the humans who were lactose tolerant. And this is this is the current picture of lactose tolerant today. In the origin here, the tolerance to lactose, maybe it was too early in the human population. They didn't have time to adapt. But as these animals were growing more and more and were used more and more in Western Europe, people had to get used to lactose. And today, in this area where we have a lot of domesticated animals, most of the people are lactose tolerant. I'm not even showing Japan and China for that. So I think this is very interesting. And this is also an interesting point. Once you have invented agriculture, once you have domesticated cereals, plants, maybe the grapevine, you have domesticated animals. You don't need to move around all the time. So you go from nomadism to sedentism. So it was agriculture, one of the most important inventions in human history, that allowed us to settle down and to create the first big tribes, big villages, then cities. And here we have the first civilizations of the old world, the earliest cities, around 3,500 BP, before present. And we have here, between the Tigris and Euphrates, the very famous cities of Ur and Uri that are probably among the most ancient in the world. So not only have we evidence from animals, from plants, from cities, but also from linguistics. And Dr. Uri said a few words about that. I love this science called glottochronology. That means glottos is the language, so you put a chronology, so a time scale to the languages. And here you find a map, and the colors here correspond, and this is the time scale. So the most ancient Indo-European language was Anatolian, probably Hittite language. So the most ancient language was Anatolian. Then it diverged into different ones. We have Tocharian, then Armenian, Greek, Albanian. Then it separated into Indo-Iranian, Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Italic, Italian and French, of course, Celtic. And here you have a map. And this Anatolian language is located in Anatolia, of course. So in southeastern Anatolia was probably the place where the common languages of almost all the Western countries, with some exceptions like Hungary, they all came from the same area. And this was at the same time as the expansion of agriculture, the expansion of plants and animals. So we had the knowledge of that, and I focused on the word wine. And I also made some research about the word wine in all these languages. In red, you have all the Indo-European languages. Of course, you know it. Vin, French, wine in German, vino in Slovak, etc., etc. You have here in our region, where we are now, the Hattic Vindu. When you have this star, it's a dead language. The Hittite was Viana, Armenia is Guinea, but we also have non-Indo-European languages like Georgian, Mingrelian. So in Georgia, Mingrelian is Gvino. Here you have the Semitic languages with the Hebrew. You have the Egyptian with, okay, I will not pronounce it. All these point to one single root for the word wine. It means that, and the root is voino, vino, nobody knows because it's reconstructed. But it shows that we were speaking about wine before the Indo-European languages started to diverge. So it's older than 8,000 BC. So we know wine since a long time before. And here I created a kind of family tree of languages with the dates of separation. So I will not go through all of this. You can read that if you want. But all this points to before 8,700 BC to a common root. Here you have the Proto-Indo-European, but it's also common to this one. And we call it vino. And I find it fascinating that all these populations with a completely different history have the same root for the word wine. It means it was really important already at that time. And this is the real reason why we invented language. Some people like it, some people don't. Okay. So what I did, together with Professor Patrick McGovern in 2003, we created a project, and we wanted to put together archaeology and genetics. So we went to different regions where McGovern had archaeological sites, and on my part, I sampled wild and cultivated varieties in Georgia, in Armenia, and in Turkey. I also compared with some from Western Europe to have a comparison point. And this is us at the headwaters of the Tigris River, 2003, Patrick McGovern and me, and this is a wild grapevine growing in the valley. We were accompanied by Professor Gökhan Söylemezoglu from Ankara University and Dr. Ali Ergül, his then assistant, now I think he's also a professor. And for the story, it was a bit scary because we almost lost Patrick McGovern during this trip. The water was very, very strong, and we were trying to catch some old vines, and Patrick slipped on the slope and was able to hold on to a branch with the water flow underneath his feet almost. And Ali was brave enough, he saved his life to catch him and pull him out. So otherwise we wouldn't have had the book or whatever else he did. So what I did is genetic grouping. And to show you very simply, I come from Switzerland, by the way, just to understand the diagram. So if you take a bunch of Swiss guys, a bunch of Irish guys, and Japanese guys, and you make their DNA, every single square here is an individual. The Swiss guys, even if they are not related, generally speaking, would group together compared to the Irish, compared to the Japanese. Then you take two new samples, mine and Patrick, and obviously I will group to the Swiss guys. Even if no relative is in there, he will group with Irish, and no one will group with Japanese. Unless my parents were lying to me, but I don't think so. So this is what we did with wild and cultivated varieties. This is a work we published in 2003. It's a bit old, but still valid and interesting. We had here different wild and cultivated varieties or grapes from Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, and also Western Europe. This first group here, every dot is one individual, is the wild grapes from Europe. And we can see that they were not related to the cultivated grapes from Europe, separate. Here, the wild from Georgia, Armenia, almost not related. And this big potato here, it's wild grapes from Turkey with cultivated grape from Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, and a little bit from Europe. So this was our first insight to say, oh, something's happening, because the wild grapes from Turkey are the closest, genetically speaking, to the cultivated grapes, not only from the same area, but also some from Europe. So I was very happy that a few years later, Sean Miles from New Jersey University used a different technique than I did back then, and he ended up with the same result. So here you have the technique is SNP, for those who are curious. I was using microsatellites, he was using SNPs. Here in letters you have the wild grapevines. Here, for example, it's Spain, completely separated. Here you have Sardinia, etc. And the dots, the colored dots, are the cultivated grapes, vinifera, from west, central, and east. And you see that TR here, Turkish wild grapevines, are in the middle, and they are connecting these two, and they are very close to the cultivated group. The Armenian, no, the Georgian, no, but the Turkish are connected with the cultivated grapes from west, central, and a little bit of east. So this was a confirmation that southeastern Turkey is most likely the best candidate for grape domestication. And it also challenges the existence of secondary domestication centers in Western Europe. So recently, Karataş in Turkey studied the genetic diversity in Turkey, especially in southeastern Anatolia, between wild and cultivated grapes. And as you see, in red, the wild, in black, the cultivated, they are all intermixed together. If they were completely different, you would have a tree with one big side of wild with branches and another big side of cultivated. You don't. You have a mixture, so it shows a big mixture between the wild and cultivated in Turkey. So southeastern Anatolia is most likely, because we cannot say firmly, but most likely the primary domestication center according to grape genetics, biomolecular archaeology, and linguistics. But we know that for many plants we can have multiple geographic origins that happen at the same time, parallel processes of domestication. And it has been shown for different species that it was observed in the Fertile Crescent. Not for grapevine, but it is a possibility. So it could also have happened at the same time or a bit later in Georgia, because in the Shulavari-Shumu-Tepe culture, it's just south of Tbilisi, Tiflis, the capital of Georgia. McGovern found this kind of jar, several of them, and he's specialized in analyzing the chemical composition of what is remained at the bottom of the jar. So he would scratch a little bit of the bottom and make a chemical analysis. And here you have samples of succinic, malic, tartaric, and citric acid. These are the pure laboratory samples. And this is what was in the jar. Exactly the same, not as clean, but exactly the same. And especially tartaric acid is the signature molecule for the presence of grape. And if you have grapes in a jar, and you have jars found lying with layers in what used to be a kitchen, it was certainly not for grape juice only. It was for wine production. So they were certainly making wine 6,000 BC, so 8,000 years ago in Georgia, but also in Armenia. In Armenia, they have found, dating 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC, they have found in this cave the most ancient wine cellar in the world, the most ancient winemaking facility. I had a chance to visit it. This is in Areni region. They called Areni One Cave. It's close to the Novarang Monastery, if somebody has been there. And in this cave, they found in 2007, published in 11, a complex of jars that are buried in the ground, just like the Georgians do with kvevri, just like some Armenians still do, they call it karas, buried or half buried. And in these jars, they found grape remains. They found grape pips, they found bunches, they found shoots, everything. So it was the earliest evidence, and also chemically proven, earliest evidence of a winemaking facility. And the archaeologist who worked on that, Boris Gasparian, told me, you know, I don't think it was a winery like we think today, that they were making wine and drinking and selling it. It was more probably something that was created for ritual and for gifts to the gods. Because in some of these karas, in some of these amphora, they found skulls of babies. And they think that they were sacrificing babies, making wine to respect to the gods, which is a bit scary, I know. I don't know of any winemaker doing that today. So there is also one question mark. I will not speak about the current project Dr. Uri talked about because it's not published yet, but I also have some information. Patrick McGovern told me that he is currently analyzing pottery from Chayanu Neolithic site, and he might, it's not official, but he might be on the process of finding winemaking evidence that dates back to 9,000 BC, so older than in Georgia. So we will see maybe in a few years a new paper. So Chayanu is here at the tip of the Fertile Crescent, and it perfectly fits with the origin of agriculture, languages, and probably viticulture as well. And one last slide about that. This is very recent. This was published 2 or 3 weeks ago. and it's a fantastic paper. I'm just showing you this journal picture. They used what they called paleogenomics, insight into the origin of French grapevine diversity. So they were able to extract enough DNA from grape seeds in archaeological sites and to compare it with the database and to identify some of them. And one of them was identified, is here, Sauvignon Blanc. Savagnin Blanc, sorry, it's not Sauvignon Blanc. Nothing. Savagnin. Savagnin Blanc is what the German call Traminer. So let's call it Traminer to not confuse it with Sauvignon Blanc. So one seed found in Orléans, it's close to Paris, it was dated 900 years old, had exactly the same DNA as Savagnin Blanc. So they were able to show that Savagnin Blanc has been cultivated for at least 900 years without changing its identity. And this is, I think, a groundbreaking result. I had the idea to do that in 2004. The technique was not ready, and it was too expensive, so I could not do that. And I'm happy that these guys have finally done that, and I'm really looking forward to these guys doing the same in Turkey, the same in Georgia, in Armenia, in Greece, or anywhere else. So this is a really brand new story about identifying remains, archaeological remains that are 900 until 2,000 years old in archaeological sites. So now I switch to some recent results about Anatolian grapes because I wanted to add some pepper to the conference. So this is a book that I have published in 2012 together with Jensis Robinson, Master of Wine, and Julia Harding, Master of Wine. It was a big success. It's a book about all the wine grape varieties that are cultivated in the world back then in 2012 to make wine. We had 1,368 in the book. I didn't bring it. It's 3 kilos and 70 grams. You know, it's like the babies. We give exactly the weight. And I checked in the book back then, for Turkey, we had 26 indigenous varieties that were used to make wine. I will not read all of them, you can do that. That was the number back then. And today it has changed a little bit. In Turkey, as I've read, you have 5 large grape collections. The biggest one is in Tekirdağ, not far from Istanbul, the National Collection. And I read as well that they have made a DNA project to have the DNA profile of all the varieties that are in the collection. It was partly made by my friend Gökhan Selimezolu. And they ended up with having 1,150 accessions. Accessions are individuals, and 850 distinct variety. I don't know, maybe somebody can help me here, if they are all Vitis vinifera or not, if they are all indigenous or not. I would be happy to read more details about that. But there's a huge diversity. And 35 of them are currently used for wine production. This is a communication by my friend Umay Çeviker, but we just noticed we need to add one more. We've seen upstairs, so now it's 36. And with guys like Udo Hirsch, maybe it's 40 or 45, and Seyit Karagazolu also will increase the number, so let's say 50 very soon, I hope. There is still a large amount of work to do for Turkish ampelographers. I'm very proud to say that I was the first to use the DNA profiling technique called microsatellites on Turkish grape varieties in 2006 in collaboration with McGovern, Ali Ergül, Gökhan, etc. And after that, many other papers have been published, but very few, I would say almost none of them, was dealing with the relationship, the direct relationship, the parentages between the grape varieties, which is what I like to do. So one first result that most of you might not have heard of is the variety called Yapinçak. Yapinçak, cultivated in the Marmara region, the sample was given to me by Seyit Karagazolu. And in 2017, I was at a symposium in Montenegro, about Montenegro viticulture, varieties, and so on. And my colleague Javier Ibanez from Spain he did a work about Montenegrin grape varieties, and he spoke about a grape called Japuđak. And I thought, wait a minute, what is that? Yeah, Japuđak, it's an old variety from the area of Budva in Montenegro, and it's a local grape. I said, interesting, give me the DNA profile. I will check, because I had an idea. And then Said sent me a sample of his Japuđak, DNA profile, same. So it's the first evidence that we have of, let's say, a collaboration or a transfer from one place to the other. We don't know who was first, but we have a connection, the same grape in Istanbul area and Montenegro. I don't know of any other example of that. And another big surprise, and this is for you, Yannis Karakassis, master of wine from Greece. This is brand new. Nobody knows outside Seyit and me. Seyit is cultivating Çalkarase, south of Izmir. And when I did the DNA profiling, most likely, because maybe we need to do more investigation, but most likely it is identical to Liatiko. Liatiko is a typical historical grape variety from Crete in Greece. And we have, again, a connection which is not really surprising, geographically speaking. But there are very few examples of that kind of coincidence, that kind of identity between two different regions. And then I also, when I put in dotted lines, it means it's not sure. So don't write it in newspaper, it needs to be confirmed. But as far as we know, with the DNA profile that we have, it is possible that Boğazkere from the Elazığ region could be a parent of Morek that is cultivated near Diyarbakir. Okay, it's not a big news because nobody knows Morek, but it shows that it's an old grape variety from this area, and it had at least one child in this area, so it's a very old, productive grape variety. And here, Sidalan from the laboratory. It happened spontaneously in the vineyard. It's possibly a natural child of Dimrit from Cappadocia and Kalecik Karase, of course, near Ankara. And this Kalecik Karase is possibly also a parent of Hasan Dede from Kırıkkale area. The other parent is unknown. Maybe one day we will find it, maybe not. If it has been abandoned, we will never find. And the last one, which is the most incredible and almost impossible for me, is this one. So maybe you know about Furmint. Furmint is the grape variety that is used in Tokaj to make the Tokaj wine. Maybe you've heard of Gouais Blanc. It's a very prolific ancient variety from the Western Europe, almost not cultivated anymore, but it had many different children. Gouais Blanc, the slide would be all around the room. Gouais Blanc is the parent, the father or mother of at least 82 grape varieties. It's the parent of Chardonnay, parent of Riesling, Blaufränkisch, Elbling, Furmint, etc., Jacquer, etc. The problem is that I've never heard of this guy before. And this was in the collection in Montpellier, a grape called Alba Imputotato from Romania. Nobody has ever heard about that. There is no historical document about it. It's only present in the grape collection. And it's really a conundrum for me to understand why or how this guy has given birth on one side to Furmint by natural crossing, spontaneous crossing with Gouais Blanc. And by the way, it has female flowers. And it's very difficult to maintain a vine with female flowers. You need to have hermaphroditic vines next to it for the pollination to occur. So it's really, really bizarre. And according to the result, this guy from Romania crossed with Prokupac from Serbia to give birth to Papas Karase that is probably coming from the Avşa island in the Marmara Sea. And I had the great pleasure to taste Papas Karase from my friend Mustafa Chamlija many times. And I've always told you, this is for me the Pinot of Turkey. And I don't see Pinot in the diagram, so I'm not happy with that. So again, these are all hypotheses. I wanted to show you what is the recent findings about these grape varieties. So in conclusion, what we can say. The grapevine was certainly domesticated in East Turkey, yes, but maybe not only, maybe also in Georgia, also in Armenia, all three of them at the same time, we don't know. But what we know is that old and forgotten grape varieties from the Near East are an important source of biodiversity. I would say that I'm not looking for a job, but I would say like that more DNA studies need to be done for grape identification and pedigree reconstruction as well. And honestly, as a wine lover and as a grape lover, when I come to a country, I like to taste the local grape varieties. So wines with local grapes do speak Turkish better than wines with international grapes. So this is my last message. If you want to save the wine grapes, just drink them. That's what we'll do. Thank you.